15. Several days later, he read about the petition in the papers. There was not a word, of course, about its being a politely worded plea for the release of political prisoners. None of the papers cited a single sentence from the short text. Instead, they went on at great length and in vague, menacing terms about an anti-state proclamation meant to lay the foundation for a new campaign against socialism. They also listed all the signatories, accompanying each of their names with slanderous attacks that gave Tomas goose flesh. Not that it was unexpected. The fact that any public undertaking, meeting, petition, street gathering not organized by the Communist Party was automatically considered illegal and endangered all the participants was common knowledge, but it may have made him sorrier that he had not signed the petition. Why hadn't he signed? He could no longer quite remember why he had promoted his decision. And once more I see him the way he appeared to me at the very beginning of the novel, standing at the window and staring across the courtyard at the walls opposite. This is the image from which he was born. As I have pointed out before, characters are not born like people of woman. They are born of a situation, a sentence, a metaphor containing in a nutshell a basic human possibility that the author thinks no one else has discovered or said something essential about. But isn't it true that an author can write only about himself? Staring impotently across a courtyard at a loss for what to do, hearing the pertinacious rumbling of one's own stomach during a moment of love, betraying, yet lacking the will to abandon the glamorous path of betrayal, raising one's fist with the crowds of the Grand Marche, displaying one's wit before hidden microphones. I have known all these situations. I have experienced them myself, yet none of them have given rise to the person my curriculum vitae and I represent. The characters of my novels are my own unrealized possibilities. That is why I am equally fond of them all, and equally horrified by them. Each one has crossed a border that I myself have circumvented. It is that crossed border, the border beyond which my own eye ends, what attracts me most. For beyond that border begins the secret the novel asks about. The novel is not the author's confession. It is an investigation of human life and the trap the world has become. But enough, let us return to Tomas. Alone in his flat, he stared across the courtyard at the dirty walls of the building opposite. He missed the tall, stooped man with the big chin and the man's friends, whom he did not know, who were not even members of his circle. He felt as though he had just met a beautiful woman on a railway platform, and before he could say anything to her, she had stepped into a sleeping car on his way to Istanbul or Lisbon. Then he tried again to think through what he should have done. Even though he did his best to put aside everything belonging to the realm of the emotions, the admiration he had felt for the editor and the irritation his son caused him, he was still not sure whether he ought to have signed the text they gave him. Is it the right to raise one's voice when the others are being silenced? Yes. On the other hand, why did the papers devote so much space to the petition? After all, the press, totally manipulated by the state, could have kept quiet, and no one would have been the wiser. If they publicized the petition, then the petition played into the ruler's hands. It was a manna from heaven, the perfect start and justification for a new wave of persecution. What, then, should he have done, sign or no? Another way of formulating the question is it better to shout and thereby hasten the end, or to keep silent and gain thereby a slower death? Is there any answer to these questions? And again, the thought we already know. Human life occurs only once, and the reason we cannot determine which of these decisions is good and which is bad is that in a given situation we can only make one decision. We are not granted a second, third, or fourth life in which to compare various decisions. History is similar to individual lives in this respect. There is only one history of the Czechs. One day it will come to an end, as surely as Tomas's life, never to be repeated. In 1618, the Czech estates took courage and vented their ire on the emperor reigning in Vienna by pitching 2 of his high officials out of a window in a Prague castle. Their defiance led to the 30 Years' War, which in turn led to the almost complete destruction of the Czech nation. Should the Czechs have shown more caution than courage? The answer may seem simple. It is not. 320 years later, after the Munich Conference of 1938, the entire world decided to sacrifice the Czech country to Hitler. Should the Czechs have tried to stand up to a power 8 times their size? In contrast to 1618, they opted for caution. Their capitulation led to the Second World War, which in turn led to the forfeit of their nation's freedom for many decades over even centuries. Should they have shown more courage than caution? What should they have done? If Czech history could be repeated, we should of course find it desirable to test other possibility each time and compare the results. Without such an experiment, all considerations of this kind remain a game of hypotheses. Inimal est kinimal. What happens but once might well as not have happened at all. The history of the Czechs will not be repeated, nor will the history of Europe. The history of the Czechs and Europe is a pair of sketches from the pen of mankind's faithful experience. History is as light as individual human life, unbearably light as a feather, as dust swirling into the air, as whatever will no longer exist tomorrow. Once more, and with a nostalgia akin to love, Tomas thought of the tall, stooped editor. The man acted as though history were a finished picture rather than a sketch. He acted as though everything he did were to be repeated endlessly, to return eternally, without the slightest doubt about his actions. He was convinced that he was right, and for him that was not a sign not of narrow-mindedness but of virtue. Yes, that a man lived in a history different from Tomas's, a history that was not or did not realize it was a sketch. 16. Several days later, he was struck by another thought, which I record here as an addendum to the preceding chapter. Somewhere out in the space there is a planet where all people would be born again. They would be fully aware of the life they had spent on Earth and of all the experience they had amassed here. And perhaps there was still another planet where we would all be born a third time with the experience of our first two lives. Perhaps there was yet more and more planets where mankind would be born 1 degree, 1 life more mature. That was Tomas's version of eternal return. Of course, we here on Earth, planet number 1, the planet of inexperience, can only fabricate vague fantasies of what will happen to man on other planets. Will he be wiser? Is maturity within man's power? Can he attain it through repetition? Only from the perspective of such a utopia is it possible to use the concepts of pessimism and optimism with full justification. An optimist is someone who thinks that on a planet number 5, the history of mankind will be less bloody. A pessimist is one who thinks otherwise. 17. One of Jules Verne's famous novels, a favorite of Tomas's in his childhood, is called 2 Years on a Holiday, and indeed 2 years is the maximum. Tomas was in his 3rd year as a window washer. In the last few weeks he had come to realize, half sadly, half laughing to himself, that he had grown physically tired. He had 1, sometimes 2 erotic engagements a day, and that although he had not lost his zest for women, he found himself straining forces to the utmost. Let me add that the strain was on his physical, not on his sexual powers. His problem was with his breath, not with his a state of affairs that had his comical side. One of the day, he was having trouble reaching a prospect for his afternoon time slot, and it looked as though he were going to have one of his rare off days. He was desperate. He had phoned a certain young woman about 10 times, a charming acting student whose body had been tanned on Yugoslavia's nudist beaches with an evenness that called to mind slow rotation on a mechanized spit. After making one last call from his final job of the day, and starting back to the office at 4 to hand in his signed order slips, he was stopped in the center of Prague by a woman he failed to recognize. "Whatever have you disappeared to? I haven't seen you in ages." Tomas racked his brains to place her. Had she been one of his patients? She was behaving like an intimate friend. He tried to answer in a manner that would conceal the fact that he did not recognize her. He was already thinking about how to lure her to his friend's flat. He had the key in his pocket, when he realized from a chance remark who the woman was. The budding actress with the perfect tan. The one he had been trying to reach all day. This episode both amused and horrified him. It proved that he was tired mentally as physically. 2 years of holiday could not be extended indefinitely. 18. The holiday from the operating table was also a holiday from Teresa. After hardly seeing each other for 6 days, they would finally be together on Sundays, full of desire, but as on the evening when Tomas came back from Zurich, they were estranged and had a long way to go before they would touch and kiss. Physical love gave them pleasure, but no consolation. She no longer cried out as she had in the past and in the moment of working. Her grimace seemed to him to express suffering in a strange absence, only at night and sleep, where they tenderly united. Holding his hand, she would forget the chasm of daylight that divided them, but the nights gave them neither time nor the means to protect and take care of her. In the mornings it was heart-ending to see her. He feared for her. She looked sad and infirm. One Sunday she asked him to take her for a ride outside Prague. They drove to a spot where they found all the streets were relabeled with Russian names and happened to meet an old patient of Tomas's. Tomas was devastated by the meeting. Suddenly there was someone talking to him again as a doctor, and he could feel his former life bridging the divide, coming back to him with the pleasant regularity of seeing patients and feeling trusting eyes on him, those eyes he had pretended to ignore but in fact savored and now greatly missed. Driving home, Tomas pondered the catastrophic mistake he had made by returning to Prague from Zurich. He kept his eyes straight on the road so as to avoid looking at Teresa. He was furious with her. Her presence at his side felt more unbearably fortuitous than ever. What was she doing here next to him? Who put her in the basket and sent her downstream? Why was his bed chosen as her shore? Why she and not some other woman? Neither of them said a word the whole day. When they got home they had dinner in silence. Silence lay between them like an agony. It grew heavier by the minute. To escape they went straight to bed. He woke her in the middle of the night. She was crying. "I was buried," she told him. "I'd been buried for a long time. You came to see me every week. Every time you knocked on the grave I came out. My eyes were full of dirt. You'd say, 'How can you see?' I'm trying to wipe the dirt from my eyes, and I'd say, 'I can't see anywhere. I have holes instead of eyes.' And then one day you went off into a long journey, and I knew you were with another woman. Weeks passed, and there was no sign of you. I was afraid of missing you, and stopped sleeping. At last you knocked at the grave again, but I was so worn down by a month of sleepless nights that I didn't think I could make it out of there. When I finally did come out, you seemed disappointed. You said I didn't look well. I could feel how awful I looked to you with my sunken cheeks and nervous gestures. I'm sorry, he apologized. I haven't slept a wink since you left. You see, you said in a voice full of child's cheer. What you need is good rest, a month's holiday. As if I didn't know what you had in mind. A month's holiday meant you didn't want to see me for a month, and you had another woman. Then you left, and I slipped down into my grave, knowing full well that I'd have another month of sleepless nights waiting for you, and that when you came back, and I was uglier than you'd be more disappointed. He had never heard anything more harrowing. Holding her tightly in his arms and feeling her body tremble, he thought he could not endure his love. Let the planet be convulsed with exploding bombs, the country ravaged daily by new hordes. All his neighbors taken out and shot, he could accept it all the more easily than he dared to admit. But the grief implicit in Tourette's dream was something he could not endure. He tried to reinsert the dream she had told him. He pictured himself stroking her face indelicately, she mustn't be aware of it, brushing the dirt out of her eye sockets. Then he heard her say the unbelievably harrowing, I can't see anyway, I have holes instead of eyes. His heart was about to break. He felt he was on the verge of a heart attack. Tourette's had gone back to sleep. He could not. He pictured her death. She was dead and having terrible nightmares, but because she was dead, he was unable to wake her from them. Yes, that is death. Tourette's asleep, having terrible nightmares, and he is unable to wake her. 19. During the 5 years that passed since the Russian army invaded Tomas's country, Prague had undergone considerable changes. The people Tomas met in the streets were different. Half of his friends had immigrated, and half of the half that remained had died. For it is a fact that will go unrecorded by historians that the years following the Russian invasion were a period of funerals. The death rate soared. I do not speak only of the cases, rather rare, of course, of people hounded to death, like Jan Prochaska, the novelist. 2 weeks after his private conversations were broadcast daily over the radio, he entered the hospital. The cancer that almost likely lay dormant in his body until then suddenly blossomed like a rose. He was operated on in the presence of the police who, when they realized he was doomed anyway, lost interest in him and let him die in the arms of his wife, but he may also have died without being directly subjected to persecution. The hopelessness pervading the entire country penetrated the soul to the body, shattering the latter. Some ran desperately from the favor of the regime that wanted to endow them with the honor of displaying them side by side with its new leaders. That is how the poet František Hruben died, fleeing from the love of the party. The Minister of Culture, from whom the poet did everything possible to hide, did not catch up with Hruben until his funeral, when he made a speech over the grave about the poet's love for the Soviet Union. Perhaps he hoped his words were being outrageously false, and they would wake Hruben from the dead. But the world was too ugly, and no one decided to rise up out of the grave. One day, Tomas went to the crematorium to attend the funeral of the famous biologist who had been thrown out of the university and the Academy of Sciences. The authorities had forbidden to mention the hour of the funeral and death announcement. Fearing that the services would turn into a demonstration, the mourners themselves did not learn until the last moment that the body would be cremated at 6:30 in the morning. Entering the crematorium, Tomas did not understand what was happening. The hall was lit up like a film studio. Looking around in bewilderment, he noticed cameras set up in 3 places. No, it was not television, it was the police. They were filming the funeral to study who had attended it. An old colleague of the dead scientist, still a member of the Academy of Sciences, had been brave enough to make the funeral oration. He had never counted on becoming a film star. When the services were over and everyone had paid his respects to the family of the deceased, Tomas noticed a group of men in one corner of the hall and spotted the tall, stooped editor among them. The sight of him made Tomas feel how much he missed these people who feared nothing and seemed bound by deep friendship. He started off in the editor's direction with a smile and greeting on his lips, but when the editor saw him, he said, "Careful, don't come any closer." It was a strange thing to say. Tomas was not sure whether to interpret it as a sincere, friendly warning. "Watch out, we're being filmed. If you talk to us, you may be hauled in for another interrogation," or as irony, "If you weren't brave enough to sign the petition, be consistent and don't try the old pals act on us." Whatever the message meant, Tomas heeded it and moved off. He had the feeling that the beautiful woman on the railway platform had not only stepped into the sleeping car, but just as he was about to tell her how much he admired her, had put her finger over his lips and forbidden him to speak.